Hi, it's my pleasure to introduce keynote speaker Andrew Grant, landscape architect, principal, and president of Grant Associates in the UK. We met Andrew last November at the International Skyrise Greenery Conference in lovely Singapore, and were truly amazed at the massive, ecologically diverse, and simply stunning master plan he presented for the current Gardens by the Bay project. We visited his site under construction and saw some of the really cool Supertrees going up. Vertical gardens rising up to 55 meters, they'll power the conservatories and act as energy centers for solar hot water heaters and solar panels. Plus, they'll provide rainwater harvesting, all covered with gorgeous plants, of course. Andrew's passion, sensitive design ethic, and love of innovative technologies really shines through brilliantly. And because of my own background in landscape architecture, I wanted a landscape architect to round out our keynote speakers. We're very happy to have such an eco-luminary as Andrew for our closing keynote speaker at our inaugural Green Roofs and Walls of the World Virtual Summit 2011. Andrew will now share with you Gardens by the Bay, Singapore. I'm Linda Velasquez with Greenroofs.com. Enjoy.
Hello, I'm Andrew Grant. I'm a landscape architect and director of Grant Associates based in Bath in the UK. I'm going to talk about Gardens by the Bay in Singapore. This is an amazing project which offers the opportunity to really look at some of the sort of forward-looking ideas for green space in urban areas. The National Parks Board, who are our clients on this project, see this as one of the key projects for the city. Not only has it to provide the best sort of outdoor recreation space for people of Singapore, but they also see it as offering a world-class tourist attraction, and something that has basically not been seen in that part of the world before. Now, we were very lucky to win the project in 2006, and we're running forward now to grand opening, which is summer in 2012. So lots of things are coming together, but it's still not a completed project. The site is about 54 hectares. It's located on an area of reclaimed land right at the heart of what will be Singapore's redeveloped futuristic part of the city. Now, there are some really interesting components of the project that I'm going to talk about a little bit more, and you'll see featured in the PowerPoint presentation that goes with this. The most important ones, I guess, are the conservatories, which are these sort of structures that are behind me up here. There are 2 hectares of air-conditioned glass houses, one which represents a collection of Mediterranean plants, another one which represents or offers an attraction of cloud forest planting from tropical mountain regions. Now, there are 2 extraordinary projects in their own right which you'll see, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about the heart of the cloud forest dome, as it's called, and the mountain, which effectively is this amazing sort of artificial lattice structure of concrete. Now, in reality, this is around about 40 meters high, and it's absolutely clad in epiphytes. And so one of the interesting challenges we've had is actually how do we physically get that to work, and how do we make this amazing 3-dimensional sort of structure become alive as this living skin of epiphytes. The other really interesting features of the gardens are these bits which are over this side, which are really the Supertrees. They've become known as the Supertrees. They're artificial tree structures ranging from 25 meters to 55 meters high. And the idea was to create a counterpoint to the glass houses, which are very significant structures in the city. We wanted this to become a gardens project. And the Supertrees offers the opportunity to create some really amazing vertical gardens, cladding the sort of trunks of these structures up to 30 meters high with an amazing collection of bromeliads, orchids, ferns, and other sort of tropical plants, and display them in a way that hasn't really been seen before. The structures are really, amazing. This is a little prototype that we made that starts to explore, the form and the shape, and always trying to find a sort of a natural correlation with the structure. The idea is that these sort of vertical pieces here are actually clothed with these amazing collections of plants, and the upper piece is basically housing photovoltaics for doing rainwater harvesting, and they become a sort of a semi-shady sort of characteristic too. And you'll see lots more information about those in the presentation. The key thing, I guess, at the end of it is that we saw right from the outset the opportunity to really demonstrate a fantastic integrated environmental design approach to this. So you'll find amazing relationships between the Supertrees and the conservatories in terms of the relationships of energy movement to energy systems. We've found very interesting ways of managing the water on the site, and obviously we've gone to some length to try and create a very biodiverse and very habitat-rich environment for right at the heart of the city. I hope the slides are self-explanatory and that you find them of interest. The project still isn't completed, but it's getting on there. This is a presentation about Gardens by the Bay in Singapore. It's a major new public park, and as landscape architects, Grant Associates have been working on this since 2006, and the project is due to open in 2012. The client has set very ambitious objectives for the project. I mean, they want it to become one of the premier tropical garden destinations in the world, but also the favourite place for Singaporeans to go as an outdoor recreational space. It's an amazing setting, set in the heart of the new development area of Marina Bay, adjacent to the Marina Sands integrated resort that's recently been opened, and the emerging new finance city and the future development areas for central Singapore. From the outset, we knew we wanted to do something that was very organic and very in tune with the sort of environment of Singapore. And after thinking about it very hard, we thought that the orchid was a very interesting sort of conceptual reference point for the scheme. The orchid being the most cosmopolitan of species in the world and epiphytic, i.e. it can sort of colonize a place in an interesting, challenging environment. So we established a series of little diagrams that started to suggest how the orchid as a reference could structure the gardens. The idea of the infrastructure taking root on this new bit of reclaimed land, the stems growing from that to become the sort of path network and linking to the city, and then the flowers themselves becoming the special gardens. Slide 4 shows you the very, very early sort of quick sketch showing how this might actually work its way through the garden. The overall size of the garden is 54 hectares, so we have a lot of space to use and to sort of generate a very interesting, rich mix of activities within the park. This ranged from the more traditional sort of things like big open spaces, walks through sort of beautiful gardens, lots of shaded walkways. But right on the waterfront, you can see there's two shell-shaped buildings, and they were the landmark buildings for the project. Two air-conditioned conservatories which would support plants from the Mediterranean world and plants from the cloud mountain environment of the tropics. These would become key elements in the project. Slide 5 shows the competition layout for the project and how that sort of early concept had taken root in the scheme. The green leafy shapes indicate earthworks which start to define spaces and start to shape and nurture sort of breezeways through the site. And you can see that clearly the pathwork network and the series of gardens arranged around the site. Very important part of it was the linkages to the rest of the city and the idea of using water in an imaginative way. And you can see there's a 1 kilometre long lake along the western edge of the site, which we imagined creating a new amazing sort of setting for the emerging development on that side of the project. On the eastern side you can see a little spiral building, that's the Marina Barrage, and basically the whole of the Marina Bay environment has been becoming a freshwater reservoir for Singapore. So this project plugs into that and part of the overall environmental improvement strategies for this part of Singapore. Slide 6 shows an early image of the conservatories right on the waterfront. The idea that these become a visual landmark in the city, taking advantage of the high light levels on this part of the site. Slide 7 shows some of the features that we wanted to develop in the heart of the gardens. These are the Supertrees. We imagine these as sort of really extraordinary structures supporting vertical tropical gardens and embedded with sort of environmental systems, which we'll talk about a little bit later. The key is that we wanted these to become a counterpoint to the conservatories. So rather than these gardens just being known for the big architectural glass houses, that they have a real strong sense of gardens. And this is part of the language and the evolution of garden structures that we've seen through history. Slide 8 shows how these new amazing structures might appear on the skyline at night. Nighttime being a really important part of the environment and experience of Singapore. You know, it's a little bit cooler. People walk and get outside a little bit more and enjoy going for walks or going for dinner or having some drinks. And we wanted to create a destination that everybody would want to go to. Slide 9 is a diagram of the ecosystem for this project. This is an early sketch that we did to start to explore how we could tie and integrate some of the environmental systems together on this project. And it seemed very fundamental to us that the idea of an air-conditioned conservatory in the tropics was going to be a challenging issue from a sustainability point of view. At the same time, we could see that it had the potential to sort of generate some new ideas and new approaches to how you condition major buildings. And certainly the brief was that this building should not use any more energy than a conventional office building of the same size. So Atelier 10, our environmental engineers, looked at this with us to find a way of sort of finding some innovative solutions, but also find a way of making the gardens work with the buildings. So there's some really integrated systems going on, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later in the presentation. The master plan evolved to create a very much more balanced approach to the way the path networks work, the main spaces, but still keeping that original concept, the idea of the orchid underlying the whole approach to the project. And on this plan, this is slide number 10, you'll see the 2 conservatories by the waterfront, and then you'll see 3 or 4 clusters of circles, which are the Supertrees. They're becoming some landmark orientation devices in the plan. Slide 11 became a very, very significant image for us, because what we wanted to do was sort of embed some significance in the way the gardens developed and the narratives that were underlying them. The red areas represent the plants and people, the idea of ethnobotany and exploring the association of plants with the different cultures of Singapore. The green areas, plants and planet, the idea that we want to explore a Southeast Asian rainforest and really unlock and display the wonderful sort of plants and phenomenon and special features of such a forest, both from the biodiversity point of view, but all the way through to the fruits and the flowers and the significance of trees. The orange spine is really that fusion between nature, art, technology, of which the Supertrees become a very particular icon. Slide 12 starts to indicate the sort of scale of some of these things. And just to sort of work in the context of this part of Singapore where 200-meter high residential or hotel type towers become its backdrop, we needed to make sure that there's a certain scale and gravitas to this whole project. The big Supertree at the heart of that section is 50 meters high and it has a bar at the top. Then you can see the 2 conservatories in the background. Slide 13 starts to show how some of these things work together. Similarly on slide 14, how these major structures sit within a new landscape. We're going to talk a little bit about the conservatories now, slide 15 through to 19. really just a series of images that show how the conservatories sit on the waterfront and how they, the identity of the landscape behind and within the conservatories becomes a very important part of the language of the site. The architects for the conservatories are Wilkinson Architects in the UK, and they've come up with these amazing, beautiful sort of forms, which are a response to trying to maximise the light that gets into the conservatory, whilst minimising the structural elements that sort of enclose it, and trying to give each conservatory a different character. Slide 19 shows how we began to sort of draw the relationships between the conservatories and the gardens, and specifically the conservatories and the Supertrees. And you can start to see some of the richness of some of the elements that are within that. And slide 20 is the engineer's version of our early concept plan, which starts to set out how the energy systems work. I don't have real time to sort of explain all of the sort of technologies. Suffice to say that there's some very interesting energy efficient systems in here, and the engineers are pretty confident that actually the running costs, the running of the cooled conservatories is effectively a sort of a carbon neutral process, principally using a biomass fuel system taken from the tree clippings from the rest of Singapore, and enhanced by some of the environmental systems on the Supertrees, including photovoltaics and rainwater harvesting, etc. And a recent image is on slide 21 of the cool dry conservatory, showing how it sort of sits in the emerging landscape. Very quickly going to run through some of the ideas for inside the conservatories. The idea that the cool dry is about Mediterranean plants, trying to get across some really amazing displays of flowers. So slides 22 through to 24 start to illustrate how some of these early concepts worked. Slide 24 shows the idea that the interior of the cool dry set out a series of themed terraces developed around particular regions, including the Mediterranean, California, Chile, South Africa, and particularly an element, a collection of baobabs and other bottle trees from different parts of the world on the baobab leaf, elevated above a main function space. That's illustrated on slides 25 and 26 and 27. The heart of the site of the cool dry is a flower field, the opportunity for a changing display of flowers within the heart of this amazing sort of structure. 28 shows the baobab leaf, an amazing collection of plants from that part of the world. 29 is the olive terrace, plants from the true Mediterranean. Slide 30 showing the baobab leaf elevated above the flower field. 31, 32, 33, there's some recent images of some of the planting going into the cool dry conservatory, some of the amazing specimens that the NParks have brought from around the world, and all starting to take shape. Slide 34 starts the story of the Cool Moist Conservatory, which is more about sort of cloud forest plants from the tropical areas, tropical montane areas. Both the Mediterranean zones and the tropical cloud forest zones are two very, very threatened habitats, and that's one of the ideas that the National Parks Board had, was to sort of find a way of displaying plants from these very threatened, fragile environments. And some of the early sketches are identified on slide 35, and on 36 you can start to see the organisation of the interior of the Cool Moist Conservatory. Between them, the two conservatories cover around about 2 hectares in area. The Cool Moist is a little bit smaller in footprint, but a bit taller, because at the heart of it is a mountain, an artificial mountain on which we want to display sort of the amazing world of epiphytes from cloud forest environments. But also, you can see on slide 37 the idea that we want to show the sort of the profile of a rainforest from these areas, show the different sort of canopy layers, and actually, you know, take elevated walkways through these spaces so that people can really appreciate them. And 38 starts to introduce you to the mountain, the idea that at the heart of this cool, moist conservatory is this quite significant structure, which is almost like a building in terms of its interior organization. It's actually a gallery space, it's a circulation structure with multimedia displays and interpretation of these environments going on within the various sort of rooms and structures within there. But clothed in this amazing lattice structure, covered with green, well, multicolored epiphytic plants, and a big garden on the top with it calling the Lost World. So the next few slides running through start to show some of the elements of this structure. 39 and 40 show the basic skeleton of the conservatory and the mountain. 42, 43, 44 begin to show different parts of how the skin, the life, the planting is envisaged on that. And, you know, from the outset we recognise that this was a very significant technical challenge, and one of the incredible things we have to do is find a way of clothing this mountain with plants, which we'll go on to in a minute. Slide 43 is an image of the top of the mountain, the Lost World, where we imagine the opportunity to really create something really very unusual and take people into a world of plants, possibly pitcher plants, possibly other sort of species from the top of a mountain in a tropical montane area. Slide 44 introduces the idea of you know, the conceptual origin of the mountain. You know, we didn't want to just make a sort of like a GRP lump with some plants on it. We wanted to do something really interesting, and the idea of a very efficient sort of structure, so it wasn't 100% sort of just concrete or structural thing, something that actually allowed us to create a structural lattice, but there's enough sort of surface area on that lattice to show off the planting. You know, the shape of the mountain, what sort of form we wanted, the scale of it, took a lot of sort of developing. So 45 and 46 start to indicate some of the early sort of technical studies of how this worked, taking the idea of the lattice structure and turning it into a three-dimensional idea. Slides 47 and 48 start to indicate how we imagined the mountain being zoned for different planting typologies. You know, reflecting the sort of the solar radiation that each side of the mountain is going to go on. The shape of the mountain meant that we're going to have some sort of quite shady underbellies. And some areas are going to get hot and some areas are going to get shady. So we wanted to start responding to that in the way we thought about the planting. But also we wanted to make sure that it was working from the interior spaces too. So how do we make sure that the organisation of the mountain itself worked. Slide 50 starts to show the 3D model of the mountain and how we started to look at different pieces of the mountain in different ways. You know, some of the mountain had to support significant sort of infrastructure for the conservatory, including the ductwork to take the hot air from the top of the cool moist conservatory out to the outside. So we couldn't actually have some holes on that area, the big red stripe you can see on slide 50. So that needed a different treatment. The waterfall dropping down from the Lost World down to the bottom, about 35 meters. You know, that also needed something different in its approach. And slide 50 is like a peeled open version of the mountain. We were looking at different techniques for how we could actually plant this, and after thinking carefully, you know, it's a very large surface area, so we needed a relatively low-tech solution to make this work. So rather than a high intensity sort of panelized system, which would be very hard to sort of fabricate to fit the geometries of this 3D organic structure, we thought we'd make it much more simple. So various places in Singapore, particularly the Botanic Gardens, have been experimenting with a sort of what we call a render solution. It's sort of an organic, rich render solution, so that lots of porosity, lots of potential to actually allow rooting into the surface and moisture retention. And that seemed to us to be a good way of starting. In addition to that, and slide 54 shows a range of different planting options. In addition to the render itself, we could imagine a series of planting pockets and little planting devices within and around the sort of lattice holes that give us an extra dimension, sometimes allowing even sort of small trees or large shrubs to be planted in some of the holes and the planters. So slide 56 through to 57 start to show some of the images that we were trying to sort of get across, the idea of the epiphytes, the idea of a lot of moss, and how we start to articulate that in the structure. In addition to that basic skin, we wanted to sort of start clothing, allowing other plants to colonize that. And we recognise the potential for using plants that can climb up from the base and clothe parts of the mountain. So slide 58 shows particular strategic locations which we identified to allow that to happen. Soil pockets on the mountain allow us to put in some of the bigger epiphytes, some of the big bromeliads. I mean, one of the amazing things that NParks have managed to do is to source an extraordinary collection of bromeliads from around the world, many species, and we think we can really show these off in certain parts of this project. Once again, taking inspiration from nature, slide 61, the idea of sort of brackets, fungi brackets, which allow us to just support different plants. Bringing the apertures to life around the lattice holes was a very important objective. Slide 63 shows an image from inside the mountain looking out. So we wanted to really bring life to those spaces so that they had a very particular sort of character. And with a bit of backlighting, you can really start to show off some of these amazing plants, as in slide 64 and 65. 66 shows some of the ideas of creating troughs on the top of the mountain or in some of the bases of these apertures to provide planting for certain species, and including some of the larger plants, possibly some of the rhododendron species, etc. Slide 68 starts to show how technical this was becoming. I mean, we wanted to really get into exploring the diversity of what we can do on this amazing structure. So if you run through the slides from 69 all the way to 78, you will see how the planting story builds up. The idea of different parts of the mountain having different characters, different elements starting to colonize different parts of it, and all together becoming this amazing sort of rich clothing to this extraordinary structure. Slide 79 shows a recent image of the basic concrete core. It's effectively, the basic structure is there. We're starting to apply the render, and the planting will start shortly. Slide 80 shows the top of the mountain. Now this is up around about 37 meters up in the air, towards the top of the conservatory, and you can begin to imagine that profile colonized by extraordinary bromeliads, and the inside of that space taking on an extraordinary character, full of small dwarf rhododendrons or pitcher plants, and having a constant sense of mist and moisture, really evocative space. That's the aspiration. And slide 81 shows a recent image of the conservatories, spookily similar to the original sort of computer renderings, but incredibly slender structures for the size of these buildings. The cool dry in the foreground is more or less 200 meters long. Slide 82 introduces the Supertrees. Similarly challenging, the idea of actually creating something of this scale, the idea of making vertical gardens that are going up to 30 to 40 meters up in the air, the idea of trying to embed all of these environmental systems into it. It's something that has been an extraordinary journey, and the starting point is really, where did the idea come from? So a combination of things really. One was we knew we needed to sort of make something very tall to sort of be appropriate scale, counterpoint to the conservatories. And we were exploring something, structures up in the 40, 50, 60 meters high at the competition stage. That was consistent with an experience I had in southwest Australia, the Valley of the Giants, where you have this walkway through the karri trees, 40, 50 meters up in the air, through these amazing, massive eucalyptus trees. So we thought that would be really an interesting experience. How do we create something magical that's that high, but also bring a sense of technology and sort of the digital world, the sort of the sci-fi world, I guess, of things that we're beginning to see. So that fusion of nature, technology, structures, fun, doing something that's never been seen before was really behind the whole idea. And 85 and 86 start to capture some of the early thoughts we had for the scale of these things and the sort of the otherworldliness of the space that we could imagine around them. During the day, amazing vertical gardens, amazing sort of garden environment at the ground, aerial walkways exploring the top. At night, the idea of an amazing night show, it becomes magical. The idea of creating somewhere that you would not experience anywhere else was a very, very important part of what we're trying to do. And at the same time, give each of these super trees a job. They have an environmental function for the whole project, whether rainwater harvesting, exhaust venting for the conservatories, or having photovoltaics on the top. That's a very important objective, as illustrated on slide 87. 88 through to 92 start to show how that this family of super trees began to emerge. The idea of clusters of trees ranging in height from 25 meters to 50 meters high, each having a different job. Some of them PVs, some of them exhaust, some of them solar thermal panels. Very important part of the process. And the design of them themselves evolved through many, many sort of iterations working with the engineers. And the structural engineers for both the conservatories and the Supertrees are Atelier 1. And to be honest, they've been fundamental to finding the form and the structure of these amazing pieces in the landscape. 94 through to 96 show some early sort of construction shots, how this sort of basic structure comes to life. The heart of the super tree is effectively a concrete column, and then we have these sort of steel members which form the trunk and the canopy. The clever thing is, it looks totally random, but actually it's really a repeated pattern of 2 or 3 elements wrapped around the core of the super tree. And then the super tree head, that looks very much like a sort of a poppy head or poppy seed head or something like that, is essentially the bit that's supporting the environmental infrastructure. It also is the place that we can play with at night time with the lighting, and it forms a very important part of the identity of the super trees when looked down on from above. 98 introduces the aerial walkway. And from below, these things are spectacular, but we knew that actually having people walking up close to these things through the canopy area, getting close to some of those high-level bromeliads and tiger orchids and other amazing sort of tropical plants would be a real important part of it. And also looking down on our gardens. And there's a lot of time spent looking at how the colour works, the aesthetics, the form, the shape, the three-dimensional organisation. 99, 100, 101 start to show how we're beginning to look at different elements. It's not just about the planting or the structure. We started to talk about the stories behind that. And slides 102 through to 111 start to show how we could use the super trees as a device for telling a story through lighting. The trees talk to each other. And 111 being, a recent study of how we can start to bring these things to life at night time. Now back to the planting. This is a really important part of the whole process. And from the outset we realised that we didn't really want to have just one solution for all the super trees. There were three main clusters of super trees. One in the central space, which we call the Lion Grove, now known as the Super Tree Grove. And that had to come across as an absolutely rich, dripping, tropical garden display. There's another garden cluster that's associated with some silver planting. We call it the silver leaf. And so we needed the plants there to sort of reflect that. And similarly, in the rival garden, which is called the golden garden, we wanted something that was of the rainforest, something very evocative that started to display plants of the Southeast Asian environment. So different clusters we began to think of them in different ways. So 113 starts to suggest the sort of central rich tropical mix. 114 starts to suggest a slightly different approach to the silverleaf, perhaps using climbing bougainvilleas, perhaps using tillandsias and silver plants, silver sort of epiphytic plants. And 115 start to think about more sort of tropical jungle vines and lianas creeping up the structure. A planting strategy was evolved for each tree having its own personality, and 117 through to 119 start to show how different qualities beginning to be looked at for the super trees. Just as the mountain, recognizing that different parts of the tree had different sort of environments, different proximity to people, and opportunities for doing different things at different scales. And that's one of the things we've been really exploring quite hard. 120 starts to show some of the devices that we've been exploring for supporting planting. 120 through to 123 start to illustrate some of the early sketches for thinking about how do we plant up the main trunk columns, how do we support plants on a sort of panelized system, that unified sort of simplified panel system that works with the super tree structure. And then as you get down into 124 through to 126, some early shots of some of the mock-ups and some of the trials of some of the systems that we applied. In essence, it's basically it's a panelized system with a sort of inert sort of substrate captured within that, all clipped onto the basic super tree structure, and an irrigation network is sort of integrated within all of that, hidden away, so that everything is sort of totally integrated and everything works as part of the mechanism, shall we say, for the tree. 127 and 128 start to show some of the early mock-ups of planting, using some of the amazing bromeliad collection. 127 is interesting because it starts to show a mix of the panels that we were using. For some of the trees, and particularly in the silver garden, we thought to be very appropriate to, rather than having sort of a very intensive system of the panels, the irrigation, why not use just open mesh system and use tillandsias and air plants to provide the planting element. Still adding some irrigation in there as well, but actually they are, much less intensive use of the infrastructure. 129 through to 137 start to show how the super trees are sitting in these amazing gardens. Now this is August, September 2011. The project isn't due to open until June 2012, so these are still early shots. It's not finished, but you can start to get an idea of the scale and the sort of the identity of the super trees and how they fit within the garden experience. 137 start to show how the super trees fit with the conservatories to become really sort of powerful icons of the landscape. 138 starts to show how the conservatories fit into the city skyscape. Amazing features in that view. So 139 basically sets out the design team, basic UK and Singapore team. Okay, that's the presentation finished. Thank you very much. So in conclusion, this was pretty much a once-in-a-lifetime project for me and the team, I guess. And what it's taught me is that to make these sort of things work, these very complex ideas, you need an amazing set of skills that go with it. And we've been very lucky to work with some of the world experts in horticulture, from specialists in bromeliads and orchids all the way through to people who really understand how the sort of technical bits of putting these sort of substrate systems together can really work on the scale that we've been talking about. But we also need to remember, I think, that that we couldn't have done these sort of things without amazing sort of structural engineering and some of the architectural skills that gone into it. And last but not least, the client has been a fundamental part of the design process, not only just allowing us to sort of get on with this and develop these ideas, but also being very much a party to the process and helping us sort of steer our way to making it an amazing success. I think this concludes this inaugural Green Roofs Walls of the World Summit in 2011. I think it's an amazing sort of an idea, and I hope everybody's had a great time and got a lot out of it. Thank you very much.